Everyone thinks Big Mom is done ever since the end of the Wano arc, but there are clues pointing to one last return, and it might be her most important moment yet in the series. This isn't just a theory, it's a whole journey. In 3 previously released video parts on this channel, I compiled them into this single video that follows the clues buried deep in One Piece's lore, from ancient origins to an explanation behind Big Mom's hunger pangs, and somehow it all leads back to her and what may be her final act in the story. Everything you're about to see is connected, even if it doesn't seem like it at first. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the greatest Big Mom Megatheory of all time. By my metrics, of course. Remember when Oda casually gave us a science lecture about pyroblowing? If he answered yes, you're lying to yourself. If he answered no, that's totally fair. I barely remembered. But here's the thing. Pyroblowing might be far more important than we ever realized beyond just being the secret ingredient to Sky Island. It could actually be tied to the origin of life itself in the One Piece world. Pyroblowing. That's a word that's only been brought up once on the exact release date of July 29th, 2002. What the hell was I doing in 2002?
I gotta sing the Doom song now! Doom, 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 doom.
When you think about it, pyroblowing is responsible for one of One Piece's most critical world-building components, Sky Islands. I mean, that much we know, but when you dig a little deeper, you start to see that pyroblowing could be just one of those little details that Oda sneaked into the story 20-something years ago, only to be relevant in the year 3050 in a huge, earth-shadowing way that completely tears the space-time fabric of One Piece as we know it. Like being tied to life itself. Assumedly. But seriously, what the fuck is up with pyroblowing? Huh? That's why today, we're gonna break that down. We'll start by explaining what pyroblowing is in its hidden nature, such as how it may be connected to Haki. And by the end of the video, I'll show you how pyroblowing could be the key to understanding the origin of many of the races we've seen in One Piece, like giants, fishmen, whatever the hell this thing is. So if you ever question at a certain point how fish grew legs and facial hair and developed the conscious decision to open up a dojo to practice the art of karate, like the video, subscribe, and click the notification bell so I can answer that oddly specific fish-related question you asked. Not me, you. Let's get into it. Before we dive into the details, let's take a moment to lay down some groundwork about pyroblowing. You've probably heard this word tossed around like once in the Skypiea arc. Well, it turns out that pyroblowing might be way more important than we ever gave it credit for. But before we connect all the dots, we need to get one thing straight. What even is pyroblowing? In One Piece chapter 240, Pagaya describes it as particles of keratin. Yeah, keratin, the same protein found in hair, nails, and animal horns. Now, if you're already confused at this point, wondering when Oda ever mentioned the term keratin, you've probably only watched the anime adaptation of chapter 240, episode 154, where instead of Pagaya describing it as particles of keratin, he uses the term corneous particles instead. Both the manga and the anime are essentially saying the same thing. So, why do I think Oda wants us to pay attention to keratin? We'll get there soon, but for now, let's talk about where it comes from. In the One Piece world, volcanoes. Pyroblowing is shot up into the sky from volcanic eruptions in the Blue Sea, and Pagaya explains how pyroblowing particles are so dense that when they're shot up into the atmosphere, they absorb moisture and create sea clouds and island clouds, the very stuff that makes Sky Islands possible. Pyroblowing is the backbone of the entire Skypiea ecosystem. But here's the thing, Pagaya also mentions that pyroblowing is a primary component of sea stone, and that opens up a whole new can of worms. So think about it. If pyroblowing is found in sea stone, the substance that suppresses devil fruit powers, then we're not just talking about fluffy clouds in the sky anymore. We're talking about a natural element that hugely impacts the One Piece world's balance of power. So, all of that sounds interesting and cool. But why the hell are keratin particles erupting from volcanoes in the first place? Like, that's not a normal volcano behavior, right? I mean, keratin is a biological substance found in living things, so why is it shooting out of the earth in volcanic eruptions? We don't have a definitive answer to that, at least in the context of the One Piece world, and I'm not going to pretend I do, but I will say this, it's fucking weird. And when it comes to Oda, when something seems weird, it's usually hiding a much deeper truth. It raises a big question. Why is pyrobloin, a substance tied to life itself, coming from the core of the Earth, or whatever the One Piece world is called? And this isn't just a small detail Oda threw in randomly. This detail has been sitting there quietly for over 2 decades, and it starts to paint a bigger picture about how the natural world and living creatures are intertwined in One Piece's lore and world building. But we're not done yet, because if we're talking about pyrobloin being connected to life, we might as well tie it to Haki. Okay, so now we know what pyrobloin is, and we've got a pretty good solid grasp on its mechanics and how it essentially is organic matter. But we need to address the big question. Could pyrobloin contain traces of Haki? According to Rayleigh, every living thing in the world of One Piece has a spiritual force, Haki. So, if pyrobloin is a natural substance connected to life and energy, could it somehow retain fragments of the spiritual energy of those who came before? Now, here's where things really get interesting. We recently learned from Vegapunk that the One Piece world used to have a different structure, with far more land masses and less ocean, way before the Void Century. And during this period, something caused sea levels to rise and wipe out continents, similar to what we saw with the impact of Emu using the so-called ancient weapon that utilizes the Mother Flame to erase the Lucia Kingdom, causing sea levels to rise. This means many people died during the Void Century. And I mean a lot of people died in the Void Century if this happened for real. So what does this have to do with pyrobloin? Well, if pyrobloin is being shot off of volcanic eruptions in the Blue Sea, especially from underwater volcanoes, it could be carrying remnants of those ancient people, their bodies, their souls, their Haki. Think about it. If Haki is an inherent spiritual energy present in all living beings, and if pyrobloin contains traces of the original inhabitants of the world, then it stands to reason that small traces of Haki could be embedded in pyrobloin itself. And this isn't even without precedent. We've seen that certain natural materials in the One Piece world can interact with Haki, like sea stone for instance. Sea stone contains pyrobloin. So, what if the reason sea stone nullifies devil fruits is that it's imbued with traces of Haki, a natural energy that restores balance to the unnatural powers granted by devil fruits? We even have examples of objects like Odin's swords possessing Haki traces. The concept of tying Haki into knots is also a recent addition to the story. So where does that leave us? If pyrobloin is essentially a conduit for Haki and spews out of volcanoes into the sky, why not everywhere else that's not in the sky? This would fundamentally change how we think about Haki and its impact on the fabric of the One Piece world, and Haki could be present in the current natural world itself. Not only that, but this connection between pyrobloin and Haki might actually have bigger implications for the origin of diverse races within the One Piece world. Southbirds. Remember these little fucks? They're relevant. The size difference between the Southbirds on Jaya and the ones on Upper Yard is really noticeable. On Jaya, the Southbirds are, pretty standard sized birds. But when we get to Upper Yard, the same species of bird, they're thick.
Damn, boy, he's thick!
So, what's going on here? Did the Southbirds just evolve to be bigger because they live in the sky, or is there something more at play? According to the One Piece Wiki, the decrease in atmosphere in Skypiea explains why the trees and animals on Upper Yard have grown to huge sizes. I couldn't really find any references or citations in the wiki to confirm this, so take this with a grain of salt, but scientifically, it sounds smart to me. In real life, the pressure in the air around us can affect how big living creatures grow. When animals live at higher places like mountains, where the air is thinner and has less oxygen, they often become larger over time. And this happens because with less oxygen available, their bodies adapt by growing bigger so they can take in more oxygen, which would be something an expert would say, but regardless of whether the climate or weather contributes to the giantification of these birds, I'm willing to bet that because pyrobloin is such a relevant element in Skypiea's environmental structure, it's literally all over the place, it contributes to the hugeness of the plants and animals on Upper Yard. So why is this important for understanding the unique and diverse races in the One Piece world? And how do pyrobloin and Haki help us solve this mystery? Earlier we discussed how pyrobloin is made of organic material, keratin particles, which naturally come from living things. We also know that every living thing has a spiritual energy, Haki, and given the significant amount of pyrobloin released into the air, it's reasonable to think that a lot of it has landed on Upper Yard, and as a result, it's become part of the environment, especially with the changes caused by the knock-up stream that sent Upper Yard soaring into the sky. This has affected everything from the quality of the soil to the essential nutrients that animals and plants need to survive. This leads me to the following idea. What if the animals and plants in Upper Yard absorbed the pyrobloin in its soil, leading to an evolutionary reaction? Think about it. Haki allows individuals to adapt to the world around them by manifesting their willpower into tangible abilities. It's not just a power system, it reflects mankind's desire to survive and live freely, even when faced with impossible odds. So take observation Haki, for example. The ability to sense the presence of others, feel their emotions, or even predict their movements. It's like a heightened survival instinct, an evolutionary adaptation that allows people to react faster and avoid danger. It's the perfect way to sense predators or threats. The more dangerous the world is, the more necessary it becomes to develop a way to stay one step ahead of danger. Armored Haki lets you harden your body or weapons, making invisible armor for protection, or beating the shit out of people really good. This ability can be viewed as a response to the harsh environment of the One Piece world, where you must defend yourself without depending on outside weapons or armor. And lastly, Conqueror's Haki imposes one's will on those with weaker spirited resolve. It's practically the ultimate expression of freedom, representing the will to shape your fate, bending the world to your desires instead of being constrained by it. In One Piece, Haki functions similarly to Darwin's idea of evolution, which is often summarized as survival of the fittest. However, in this context, it's more about the survival of the most strong-willed. Those who push their determination to the limit and refuse to give up their freedom are the ones who can evolve and adapt through Haki. Essentially, Haki represents a form of natural selection in the One Piece world. The stronger your will is, the better you can handle the difficulties that arise. Conversely, if your will is weak, you're more likely to be overwhelmed by the tough circumstances around you. Now, let's apply that to Upper Yard. Plants and animals already struggling to adapt to a harsh, new environment suddenly find themselves exposed to pyrobloin-infused soil that contains traces of Haki. Over time, as these creatures absorb nutrients from the soil, the Haki within the keratin particles respond to their willpower to survive. So when these animals are suddenly thrown into a new environment with pyrobloin particles floating around, it's possible that the pyrobloin reacted to their survival instincts, causing them to grow bigger to match their will to survive. Now let's expand this idea to other non-human races. So imagine that pyrobloin spread across various parts of the world, especially to regions with extreme environment, where people's survival instincts were pushed to the limit. Over time, the Haki traces in the pyrobloin-infused environment could have responded to the willpower of those people, causing them to evolve into entirely new races. Think about giants, for example. From what we could tell, regular humans would find it very difficult to live in the environment of Elbaf. Thankfully, the Straw Hats aren't regular humans. Usopp and Nami, that's arguable. It is home to massive creatures and experiences harsh snowstorms and other types of weather, I assume, and it's also famous for its frequent wars. The giant ancestors developed ways to survive in these extreme, mountainous, and unpredictable weather conditions, which probably helped them grow in size and strength over many generations due to their willpower to survive, triggering pyrobloin exposure in their bodies and thus changing their lineage factor. Fishmen and merfolk may have developed from human ancestors who lived in areas with plenty of water, where their survival was at risk due to the environment. The presence of pyrobloin in the soil and water enhanced their lineage factor with Haki elements, leading to their gradual evolution into fish people shaped by their survival instincts. The ancestors of the Long Leg tribe likely hailed from high-altitude locations where survival depended on mastering the art of using tangent stilts. I mean, who want legs so long that you could practically hop over mountains and cover long distances? But at some point, they're probably thinking, we're tired of the stilts bullshit. We wish we had longer legs. Their instinct to survive and reach higher places, along with the Haki traces found in their environment through pyrobloin, likely led to an evolutionary change that resulted in longer, stronger legs, thus embodying their desire for the freedom to reach higher and farther places. Imagine if the dwarves from the Tatara tribe originally started out as insects, and their environment, enriched by pyrobloin, reacted to their determination and need to survive. Over time, this interaction could have led them to evolve into intelligent humanoid beings. And this idea explains their size, natural strength, deep connection to nature, and ability to fall for every gaslighting trick in the book. I could go on and on about every race, but it would take forever, which is time I do not have, nor do you. Despite all of us being invested into an over 2-decade-long series, let's be real, we kind of do have all the time in the world in that respect, just for One Piece though. So if pirate blowing really does influence evolution and survival instincts, it makes you wonder, what happens when someone is exposed to it before they're even born? There's a particular Yonko who stands out to me in that regard. Their physical state and their relentless appetite seem unusually intense. Their hunger is so strong that it feels almost like an inherited instinct ingrained in their essence, and maybe, just maybe, that hunger wasn't born out of greed, but necessity. But that's a theory for another day. Big Mom was never supposed to exist like this. Her hunger pangs, her tough skin, her pant size, none of it is natural. And what's crazy about this is how her mom may have unknowingly doomed her before she was even born. This isn't just a theory, it's a missing piece of her backstory that changes everything. The answer might be hidden in something we've completely overlooked, a hidden force that rewired Big Mom's body before she was even born. Something that explains why her hunger is so extreme, why her body defies all logic, and why she's unlike anyone else in One Piece. In this video, we're gonna break down the shocking truth about what really happened to Big Mom in the womb, how a bizarre environment phenomenon may have altered her genetics, why her mother's pregnancy cravings may have played a bigger role than we ever realized, and how it all ties back to a long-buried secret about the world itself. This video is a sequel to a previous one that I made about the origins of the One Piece races. You don't need to watch that one first, but if you want the full picture, I highly recommend watching it after this. And I highly recommend you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click that notification bell so you can stay updated on when I drop a new One Piece theory like this. Let's get into it. Let's be honest, Big Mom's hungers are far from normal. Even in the One Piece world context, this is a fucking anomaly. Probably something that shouldn't even be possible. In a world like One Piece filled with countless characters who can stuff their way through just about anything to the point of putting Kirby out of the gawk business, i.e. Luffy, and probably Kaido too when it comes to drinking, Big Mom seems to be the only one whose hunger completely turns her into a demon. Sure, at first glance we might dismiss her hunger pangs as just another one of Oda's quirky character gags, something played for laughs, but also kinda low-key terrifying in the way she be moving like Godzilla sometimes. But when you start to think about how she goes on that Ozempic diet the longer she's away from some wedding cake, you have to admit that something's just straight up wrong with her. Why does her body behave like it's in a desperate survival mode, even when she's well-fed most of the time? I mean, her entire empire is made out of food. She should be good, but she ain't. She is not correct.
This boy is not correct. He is flawed.
This isn't just about food. It's about her body itself. Her hunger doesn't follow what you would consider normal biological rules in One Piece. To me, that implies it's not a choice or a habit, it's a condition. And that leads us to an even bigger question. If her hunger is unnatural, something inside her must be causing it, right? Big Mom's hunger isn't the only thing that adds up. Her entire body alone is just weird for a human. She isn't just big, she's unnaturally big. She stands taller than nearly every human character in One Piece, and yet she's not even considered, at the very least, close to a giant. I mean, she's compared to an iron balloon because of her tough skin, and she literally killed the former captain of the giant warrior pirates, who was beyond the average size of a giant. That same guy got seismic tossed by Big Mom when she was only 5 without even breaking a sweat. I don't even think Kaido or Whitebeard was even that strong when they were kids. Maybe Kaido, I don't know. At this point, we have two strange, seemingly unrelated facts. Big Mom's hunger is entirely unnatural, and her body does not fit into any known race category. Do not be fooled by Oda, she is not human. But what if these two aspects are not separate mysteries, but symptoms of a deeper issue? Could her body be struggling with something it was never designed to handle? This prompts a crucial question. Is there something in her biology that explains her incredible strength and cravings? So, Big Mom's parents are surprisingly relatively normal-looking humans, so by all logic, she should have been one too. But here's where things get really interesting. Just because someone appears one way doesn't mean they don't have something hidden deep in their DNA that indicates something else. In genetics, there's something called dormant traits, characteristics that don't show up in a person, but can still be passed down to their children. This happens in the real world all the time. You can have a family with generations of brown-haired people, and suddenly a baby is born with red hair because an ancestor from way back then had that gene. The trait was there all along, it just never showed itself until the right conditions were met. So what if that's what happened with Big Mom? What if one of her parents, since we know nothing about them, had dormant giant genetics buried deep in their lineage factor? Not enough to make them big, but not enough to give them any noticeable traits. And maybe under normal circumstances, Big Mom would have just been a regular human, like her parents. We'd be calling her regular mom, maybe medium-sized mom. Maybe that giant blood would have stayed hidden like it likely did for generations before her. But something changed. Something woke up those dormant traits and forced them to activate. And this is where things get even weirder. If she were truly part giant, her body should work kind of like a giant's, right? But it doesn't. Her growth doesn't follow a normal pattern, whatever that may be for a giant. I just assume they fly out of their mom as a 300-pound baby and grow from there. That's how much attention I paid in sex ed class. Big Mom's metabolism has to be one of the biggest red flags that something isn't right. Giants eat a lot, but I think it's fair to assume that they don't go into mindless hunger rampages when they don't get what they want. Big Mom does. Her body reacts to food deprivation like it's a life or death emergency, like she's starving even when she's eaten more than enough. That's not an appetite issue. That has to be a biological error. And it brings up an intriguing possibility. What if each unique race in One Piece absorbs and processes sunlight energy at different levels through sunlight exposure? Don't worry, we'll connect this back to Big Mom soon. This isn't crazy as it sounds. In the real world, species absorb and process sunlight in various ways. Humans, for instance, produce vitamin D from sun exposure, but at different speeds. The color of our skin changes based on how much sun we get, and this affects how well we can make vitamin D. People with darker skin who typically live in sunnier regions don't produce vitamin D as easily as those with lighter skin, who often originate from cooler areas with less sun. Now, apply that concept to One Piece. What if all races in One Piece, humans, giants, fishmen, and others, absorb sunlight but at different levels? If that's true, then giants, because of their massive size, would naturally absorb way more energy from sunlight than humans. It would actually make sense from a biological standpoint. But here's where things get really weird. If Big Mom has partially activated giant traits, then her body might be trying to function like a giant's, but without the ability to properly absorb energy from sunlight. That can explain everything. Her body is trapped in an incomplete transformation. It's struggling to process energy in a way it was never designed for. If she were intended to absorb sunlight like a giant but lacked the ability to do so effectively, her body would continuously be starving for more energy. And if that's the case, her hunger issues arise from her body's urgent attempt to compensate for something it lacks. She isn't eating out of desire, she's eating because biologically, her body believes it's starving. This is why no amount of food is ever enough for her. It's why she can never stay satisfied and her hunger spirals out of control until she loses herself because her body wasn't meant to function like this. And this is where things get really important. If this was some weird genetic mutation, we might be able to say, well, she's just built different. But I don't think that's what's happening here, because this issue only happens to Big Mom. If this was a genetic inheritance, wouldn't we expect to see at least some other cases like this? Like maybe distant relatives, maybe, I don't know, her kids. They seem pretty normal compared to her, except for Ewan. Those Tintin looking eyes still creep me the fuck out. That means whatever happened to Big Mom was something external that forced her body into the state. Something triggered her body to start developing like a giant without actually giving her the full ability to function like one. And that's where pyrobloin might come in. Now, if you've been following my theories for a while, you might remember that I made a whole video breaking down the possible origins of the unique races in One Piece and how pyrobloin may be the key factor behind their existence. Again, if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend checking it out because it lays the groundwork for why pyrobloin may not just be shaping the world itself, but also the living beings within it. In that theory, I explored the idea that pyrobloin could have contributed to the creation of giants, fishmen, and a whole bunch of other shit by acting as an environmental force that shaped their genetic evolution over time. If pyrobloin can influence species on a large scale, it raises an even bigger question. What happens when a developing life form is exposed to it before birth? Because pyrobloin isn't just a normal mineral, it's biological. It contains keratin, the same substance in human hair, nails, and animal horns. In that previous theory video, I even posed a pretty important question that deserves more attention. Why is a biological material coming out of volcanoes in the first place? Because in the real world, volcanic eruptions don't produce keratin. They vomit out lava and other hot stuff. A volcano probably birthed Akainu, if we're being honest here. But in One Piece, pyrobloin contains organic material. This suggests that pyrobloin isn't just a regular volcanic byproduct, it might actually contain something alive, or that was once alive, or something that directly interacts with living organisms. Again, I go way more into that in my theory video about the origins of One Piece races. This makes me wonder if pyrobloin, when in high amounts, could actually cause changes in genes. Like if Big Mom's mom was exposed to pyrobloin, whether through volcanic activity, contaminated water, or just by living in an area with seemingly high pyrobloin levels without even realizing, then it's possible that those particles entered her system and interacted with Big Mom's body while she was still developing in the womb. Instead of a slow, natural evolutionary process like we see in species adapting over thousands of years, this could have been an instant forced mutation. Pyrobloin flipped the switch in her DNA that was never meant to be flipped. It activated dormant giant traits that could have stayed hidden, but it did it in a way that left her body unstable. And that could explain everything. Her uncontrolled growth, her overpowered durability, her broken metabolism, her hunger that never stops, all of it. Symptoms of a body that was never supposed to exist. And if that's true, then Big Mom is a straight up, and not to be rude, a walking biological accident. This leads us to the final piece of the puzzle. If pyrobloin was responsible for creating Big Mom as she currently is, or was, if you still think she's dead, how did it actually pull that off? So as I said before, in my theory video about the origins of One Piece races, I discussed how pyrobloin has a partly organic composition. It connects to Sea Stone and Sky Island. Most importantly, I introduced the idea that it could contain remnants of Haki. Why? Because Haki exists in every living thing. If pyrobloin is spewed out from volcanic eruptions and yet contains organic material, it could contain traces of the past, fragments of people, their bodies, their willpower. And if that's true, if Big Mom's parents came into contact with pyrobloin, whether through food or their home environment, there could be various reasons for this contact. It's possible that Big Mom's mother wasn't merely providing her fetus with nutrients, she was feeding her remnants of the past. In other words, remnants of Haki. See, in my previous theory, I speculated that traces of Haki and pyrobloin react to the survival instincts of beings that absorb it. This led me to theorize that the different races in One Piece may have evolved the way they did because the pyrobloin-infused environment literally responded to their will to survive, thus changing them externally to reflect that internal change. But here's where things really take a dark turn. What happens if an unborn child is exposed to pyrobloin while their body is still forming? What happens if the leftover survival instincts, the traces of Haki within pyrobloin, are absorbed into a developing fetus? If Haki responds to willpower, the Haki trapped inside pyrobloin may have responded to Big Mom's mother's will to feed her child. Her mother's cravings weren't just about hunger, they were about ensuring her baby grew big and strong and had everything it needed to survive. Them be pregnancy cravings. And sure enough, it may have worked. Too well. Earlier, I suggested that giants might absorb sunlight at a significantly different rate than humans and other races, which could explain how they sustain their massive bodies without constantly starving. But Big Mom, she was never supposed to inherit that ability. Her body wasn't supposed to be of a giant's, but pyrobloin forced her dormant giant genes to activate unnaturally, and without the ability to process energy like a natural giant, her metabolism was left completely broken. And that's why she's always starving. Her body is stuck in survival mode. It was programmed in the womb to always take in energy, but since it can't absorb it correctly, it compensates by forcing her into hunger rampages. And maybe because of her mother's pregnancy cravings, combined with the traces of Haki and pyrobloin, an unnatural mutation was created that left her permanently imbalanced. This means Big Mom's hunger is essentially a curse, but maybe she could turn that curse into a blessing down the line. The kind of blessing that could fully redeem her character in a way that makes sense and serves as the perfect send-off. If you really want to see her kick the bucket. Trust me, after all the Big Mom big memes and the I want wedding cake on repeat for how many times, I think a lot of people would be pretty happy to see her go. We'll discuss that in part 3 of this theory later on. If you're enjoying this Mega Theory and want more Mega Theory compilations like this, it's probably the best time to like the video, subscribe to the channel because we're trying to reach 500 subscribers before the end of the year, and click that bell so that way you can know when another drops. Big Mom is about to pull off the most insane redemption arc in One Piece history. If you saw my last Big Mom video explaining the real meaning behind her hunger pangs, you know this theory has been cooking for a while. If Oda has been leaving hints, as I believe, signaling the dangers posed to the Treasure Tree Atom later in the Elbaf arc, Big Mom is about to sacrifice herself to become the living soul of the Treasure Tree Atom to finally resolve her unfinished business and bad blood at Elbaf. To prove this, we're diving into all the unresolved ties Big Mom has to Elbaf, the hidden foreshadowing and clues Oda's been planting for years, and the symbolism and themes that make her sacrifice meaningful, and most importantly, how this insane theory could transform Big Mom's legacy from destruction to salvation. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this might be the most unforgettable character moment in One Piece history. Let's get into it. Let's talk about the one place that's haunted Big Mom her entire life, Elbaf, the place where everything went to shit. As a kid, her hunger pangs escalated and she accidentally killed Jorl, one of the top giants. From that moment on, the giants fucking hated her guts, and honestly, can you blame them? To them, she wasn't a child. We're practically talking about Satan's spawn with pigtails over here. Kicking her out was the best punishment instead of the alternative, death. And then you got the whole cannibalizing Mother Caramel mess, which, by the way, I'm gonna be back and forth with calling this asshole Caramel. I don't know which is right. Who cares if we're being honest? She sucks. Oh yeah, and cannibalizing her preschool friends. That's also another thing that sucks. If it's becoming clearer for you, you can see why Big Mom needs to return to Elbaf for her own sake. I mean, Jesus Christ. And what's crazy to this day is that Big Mom had no idea that Mother Caramel was nothing but a child trafficker planning to sell her off to the world government. That whole kindness sister act bit was part of a sick business where kids were nothing more than just merchandise to be sold to the highest bidder. To her, Mother Caramel was the only person who ever made her feel accepted, the one ray of light in a world that just kept slamming the door in her giant face. And while her flashback doesn't delve too deeply into Big Mom's psychological trauma as a child, I think it's safe to say that she believes it was all her fault that Mother Caramel and her friends, quote-unquote, abandoned her. Oda has made it his mission to clearly portray Big Mom as a deeply scarred and tragic character in need of constant 24/7 around-the-clock therapy. Considering how Elbaf values strength and honor and dying gloriously in battle, which is a polite way of saying that they believe funerals should double as Michael Bay films, their warrior code definitely appears as an opportunistic checklist that Big Mom could tackle, so when she eventually goes for the whole redemption through self-sacrifice thing, chances are the Giants are willing to look the other way after years of mourning for one of their beloved leaders being seismic tossed by a child. Granted, a regular child with regular issues. And if you've been paying attention, Oda's been dropping hints all over the place that this is precisely where her story's headed. If any of you, for even a moment, genuinely felt bad for Big Mom because of her flashback, congratulations, you're not a piece of shit. You possess what I call empathy. I believe Big Mom's flashback effectively leaves just enough grace for us to conclude that, yeah, how Big Mom ended up the way she did, not entirely her fault. She simply wasn't surrounded by the right kind of role models. That's why I believe it'll take a village to bring Big Mom back into reality and help her understand she's crossed a lot of lines in the sandbox. And I mean a ton of lines of all types. You got your wavy lines, zigzags, this fucking weird thing. So who's part of this village, you may ask? Let's start with Chopper, because the weird amnesia subplot insert in Wano's Gotta Go Somewhere. Of course, throughout this interaction, Chopper is completely scared out of his mind that she'll snap at any moment. However, he also spends more time with her than probably any other Straw Hat, if I recall correctly. He sees her in this strange, docile state, making friends with Tama. It's not that he suddenly perceives some tragic death in her, as we the audience did during her flashback, but it's also not nothing. It's complicated. We're witnessing Big Mom acting like the person she could have been, and Chopper's presence during all of this is significant. He's a doctor, the one who's supposed to help people, even those on the opposing team he's willing to throw a bone to. I think that's something to keep in mind for the future, because it not only adds depth to Big Mom, but also shows Chopper's possible future role. He has witnessed her vulnerable side and knows she has the capacity to not eat your face in a fit of rage. And when you really think about it, Chopper and Big Mom actually have a lot more in common than anyone gives credit for. Both have a huge sweet tooth and share a pink color theme. Sometimes they behave like kids, not just sometimes, like 90% of the time. Each is viewed as a monster in their own unique way. And this is where things get even deeper. Chopper is more than just a doctor. He's a healer of many things. Big Mom's smooth brain is not one of those things. He was raised by Dr. Luke, who believed that there's no such thing as an incurable disease. He taught Chopper that people could be healed not through medicine, but also by healing their hearts. He once suffered from a terminal illness, something evidently physical, but one day he traveled to a distant land where he saw a mountain covered in the overwhelming beauty of the scene, and the emotion of the moment healed him. Now, did the cherry blossoms literally cure him?
No.
Not in a biological science textbook way, and that's the whole point. It was a psychosomatic cure. Luke was dying, but seeing those cherry blossoms triggered something in him. Hope, joy, and purpose. It's the entire reason why Luke invented the cherry blossom powder. He wanted to share their experience of joy and hope he felt after seeing those cherry blossoms. So by sacrificing her soul to Treasure Tree Adam, Big Mom could shift from her long-standing habit of taking to one of giving, and her twisted love into something genuine and enduring, becoming a living symbol of love through sacrifice. And Chopper's contribution to her character arc ties it all together. And then there's Gerd, a much subtler piece of the puzzle, and funny enough, another doctor just like Chopper. Gerd was Big Mom's childhood friend when Linlin still had a chance at normalcy, but after Big Mom killed Jorl, Gerd, like the rest of Elbaf, had no choice but to cut her off. However, unlike the others, Gerd does remember who Big Mom used to be, that innocent, sweet girl who just wanted to be loved. And now we get to Bonnie. Bonnie might actually be the sleeper key to Big Mom's entire character arc. Let's start with the obvious. Bonnie and Big Mom look eerily similar in terms of character designs. They both have pink hair, and even their makeup, especially with the lipstick, is quite similar. They eat as if their lives depend on it, and these comparisons are exactly why people once theorized that Bonnie was one of Big Mom's daughters. While that's not the case, it's still hard to ignore the similarities between the two, suggesting that something narratively must arise from these parallels. Additionally, one aspect I believe people may not have picked up on is their connection to the world government, with Mother Caramel collaborating with the world government in her child trafficking business, and Bonnie's father Kuma, who undertook a journey of becoming a prisoner of the world government, being experimented on for the Pacifistas Project, and ultimately descending back to slavery. But it goes even deeper than that when you think about it. Bonnie used to suffer from sapphire scales, a fatal illness that worsened under natural light, from which she was eventually cured thanks to Dr. Vegapunk. In my previous Big Mom theory, I speculated that her hunger pigs might also be triggered by her body's inability to process energy from sunlight due to what I proposed was her partially activated giant DNA. This is just a theory, but even if a small part of it is true, Bonnie and Big Mom might share more than just surface similarities. They could be biologically linked in the way their bodies respond to the world. But here's where it gets wild. Bonnie can age herself down with the HH fruit. Why does that matter? Because it would activate Big Mom's mother mode, the only time she shows maternal instincts. Mother mode only activates around kids aged 10 and younger. So imagine Bonnie, who is presently her actual age of 12 in the Elbaf arc, ages even further down to the age of 10, triggering mother mode. This could be the breakthrough moment, a chance to open a calm and collected dialogue with Big Mom without her trying to kill you. This exchange could crack something open in her, and Bonnie, who's already spent so much time confronting all the bullshit with rescuing her father, Kuma, could also contribute to helping Big Mom face the truth about Mother Caramel. Together, they could make a powerful thematic pair. All these interactions with Big Mom involving Chopper, Gerd, and Bonnie seem to be in the cards. Now that we recognize these connections, we must explore the deeper meanings behind certain symbols and themes that Oda has introduced into the story. Let's talk about ships. Not the kind that fans argue about on Reddit, actual boats. In One Piece, ships aren't just for transports. They have feelings, experience breakdowns, and full-blown existential crises. They are fully developed characters, and in the unique case of One Piece, they are shaped by the emotional attachment pirate crews have towards them. This connection is embedded in the language, the tradition, and the story of sailors. Referring to a ship as she illustrates how we project care, safety, and memory onto something that carries us through danger as a home. And yeah, that sounds a bit too far dramatic, but that's kind of the point. In One Piece, the absurd and the emotional aren't separate. They live in the same place. A ship can have a lion face and still represent unconditional love. That's the magic of it. And if you're enjoying the theory video so far, you can leave a like and subscribe with only 2 clicks, just like magic. Actually, nothing like magic. There's no such thing as magic in this godless world. Now, layer that onto Big Mom. Her whole identity revolves around a distorted vision of motherhood that lays the groundwork for her character to evolve. Now, I'm not saying Big Mom's gonna turn into a ship, because this video is already about her turning into a tree, but answer the simple question for me. What are ships made of? Wood. And where does wood come from? Trees. And would you look at that? We have a tree with the strongest wood in the world, used to make the ship of the future king of the pirates, right here on Elbaf. All of the random ship talk is to say that if ships are mothers that carry us, trees are the origin, that quiet source of strength, the foundation. In this way, Treasure Tree Adam symbolizes motherhood in its purest form and aligns perfectly with the concept of Big Mom reincarnating into the tree. But here's where things take an interesting turn, because before a tree can become a ship, before it can carry and protect life, it has to be cut, it has to be shaped, and what do you use for that? Actually, a lot of things, but let's just say an axe for no particular reason. We have plenty of people using axes, especially in the Elbaf arc, and I believe Oda wants us to view the axe as a symbol of change, representing both destruction and creation. It represents the ability to end something while also allowing for the opportunity to build something new in its place. Elbaf serves as an excellent backdrop to explore this idea because much of its lore and culture is inspired by Norse mythology, especially with Ragnarok, a catastrophic event that involves both the destruction and creation of the universe. This theme is subtly present, mainly through three characters in the Elbaf arc associated with axes: Skabrgaban, Gerd, and Chopper, believe it or not. With Chopper, the entire reason he was given that name in the first place is that Dr. Hirulu compared his antlers to axes for chopping trees. However, given how we established the dual creation and destruction symbolism behind the concept of axes, you could kind of squint your eyes and see that Chopper fits the bill by using his inner and outer monster to protect people, transforming what should have been a curse into a gift. That's creation born from destruction, and that's what Big Mom needs to learn, that the monstrous parts of her don't need to disappear, they just need to be repurposed. With Gerd, she was a close friend of Big Mom's when they were kids, and after the disaster in Elbaf, she cut ties. Not because she stopped caring, but because she understood the danger Big Mom posed to her people. That's an emotional axe swing, and I'm not saying that just because she uses an axe. Sometimes love means walking away. Now, years later, she might be one of the few who can remind Big Mom of who she used to be, the child who wanted to be accepted. Last we got Skabrgaban, who I don't see personally involving himself in the Big Mom intervention. Still, for the sake of him carrying around axes, I see no reason not to include him because I think he serves a thematic purpose that contributes to Big Mom's character arc. Now, Gaban's twin axes aren't just for show. His entire vibe centers around breaking down barriers. He calls himself the preacher of love. The guy fights with weapons made to tear through walls, or in his case, a mountain. Yet he speaks like a man trying to free hearts. That's not an accident. I see what I did there. The axe in his hands becomes something more than merely a weapon. It's a philosophy, love without limits, destruction that leads to something better. And that makes him thematically perfect for the story because Big Mom has been doing the opposite for her life, using fear to keep people close, controlling love instead of letting it breathe. But through Gaban's lens, through the metaphor of the axe, there's a path forward, a way for her to stop forcing love and start freeing it, to cut down the warped world she's built in Topland and offer something new in its place, something born not from domination, but from sacrifice. When considered this way, the axe serves as a metaphor that connects all of them, including Big Mom, teaching us that we can rebuild what has been destroyed. In Big Mom's case, sacrificing her soul to restore the Treasure Tree Adam would be her atonement for what she destroyed in the past, allowing her to create something better in the future. And what that could look like is what we'll get into next. Since Elbaf holds the key to Big Mom's resolution, let's talk about the current state of the island. Elbaf takes pride in its warrior lifestyle centered around war. However, before his death, King Harold decided it was time for a cultural shift. He sought peace, trade, and diplomacy, a new Elbaf that wouldn't address every problem through passing out from drinking with an axe lodged up your ass. In fact, he was so committed to this cause that he removed his own horns, rejecting his ancient giant lineage. But here's the catch. While those reforms made Elbaf tread into a more peaceful territory, they also made the next generation little bitches. The kids are just ill-prepared for the tiniest inconveniences, let alone an invasion of their fears coming to life. So now you've got a nation split in two. The chiefs of the past refusing to let go of tradition, and the future who simply can't stand on business. This is where Big Mom comes into play because the irony is that she represents both extremes in a broad thematic sense. One side of her is chaos incarnate, practically a one-woman army ready to square up with whoever lays a fingernail on some Senla. On the other side, there is a kind, gentle soul of a little girl that's just really really not that bright. I mean, let's be real. And I say this with the most utmost respect. Baby Big Mom was a fucking idiot. And yet, who better to symbolize the need for balance and harmony? Here's the thing. With Elbaf being a culture that relies on symbolism and storytelling as a framework for living, it makes sense for a symbol, aside from Sun God Nika, to exist regarding the question, can strength and peace coexist without canceling each other out? Luffy addresses that question in his own way as the present-day Sun God Nika, as I've discussed multiple times in this channel, demonstrating how he strikes a balance between liberation and destruction. Additionally, Big Mom's sacrifice to reincarnate into Treasure Tree Adam can serve as another answer to the same question posed earlier. For once, she wouldn't be taking, she'd be giving. Her soul, that is, into Treasure Tree Adam, which serves as the heart of Elbaf. And just to refer back to the tree's vulnerabilities to fire and lightning, the same elements connected to Big Mom's homies Prometheus and Zeus, it would be such a poetic twist that the source of those fire and lightning powers being Big Mom herself, which once defined her destruction, would now, as the same person and source, protected something sacred. The irony is perfect. The woman the giants feared most becomes their guardian. The monster becomes the mother. So how do we turn Big Mom into a tree? The answer obviously lies in the mechanics of a soul fruit. Typically, it allows her to take fragments of a person's soul, or her soul itself, to animate objects. But in this instance, let's just say that after the final battle between Luffy and whoever he fights, she takes her whole soul, leaving no fragment behind, and just dumps that shit into the Treasure Tree Adam as it's dying from whatever or whoever attacked it. The tree begins to stir, its trunk begins to glow, its branches stretch to the skies, and pink blossoms bloom on its branches, echoing the cherry blossoms that healed Drum Island, the same blossoms that once made Hero Luke believe that a man only dies when he's forgotten. In this case, the blossoms say something else. Even a monster can choose to be remembered as something more. And it brings us full circle, because when Big Mom becomes the Treasure Tree Adam, she becomes a living answer to the question hanging over Elbaf since King Harold's reforms. Can you have both strength and peace? And the answer would stand tall in the heart of the island, its petals pink and glowing with life. It's the final gift of a woman who spent her whole life trying to build a family through fear, only to realize that a real family is built through love, sacrifice, and protection. While we're on the topic of abnormally large parental figures, and wow, what a seamless transition that was, let's talk about the One Piece, because naturally the answer to the world's greatest mystery might be inside one, specifically a whale. Yes, really a whale. So go ahead, check out my theory. Spoiler alert, it's about a whale.
I hit you like I'm on your ID. I'm aiming the album to fall off. It's pretty ironic.